Excuse me. Good evening. This is the March 1st, 2023 City of Sunbury Services Committee. Can I have a roll call, please?
Mr. Capel,
Here.
Mr. Mayor St. John.
Here.
Mr. Neff.
Here.
Mrs. Cooper. Here. Or present.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the minutes from the February 1st, 2023 meeting. Second by Mr. Neff. Roll call.
Mr. Capel,
Yes.
Mr. Neff,
Yes.
Mayor St. John,
Abstain.
Mrs. Cooper. Yes.
All right, no visitors on the schedule no unfinished business on the schedule. So in new business, we've got Sunbury Meadows East Speed Study.
Thank you. I believe you've got a document there. Excuse me. So we did, a speed study was conducted. I believe your police had set some monitors out there. The speed study was on Sunbury Meadows between Granville and Viola. It was a 4-week study between November 29 and December 26th. The first 2 weeks, I believe, were unactivated. The signage, second 2 weeks had the signage. As it turns out, you can see on these graphs, I don't know that the graphs are all that helpful. The bottom line is the 85th percentile in both directions is reasonable. In the north route, it's 32 miles per hour. Southbound, it was 27 miles per hour. It made no difference whether the sign was activated or deactivated as far as the reaction of the public with a traveling public went. But 85th percentile it means that 75% or 85% of the vehicles on that road were traveling at that speed or less. So 32 north, 27 south. Generally considered, it's definitely considered acceptable in most communities. It tends to be that all of us, as we see a car driving down the street, it's usually not going as fast as we think it is.
What's the speed limit? 25?
25, yes.
I was telling Daryl yesterday, whenever you get the results back from a speed study, it's generally not as impressive as you originally think that it's going to be.
It's been my experience too. Yes.
So I guess the big question is, because we had talked about mitigation of speed in the past, is there any call for it? Should we be looking at mitigation?
If there's a call for any mitigation, it is optional. I mean, it's at your discretion whether or not you want to do it. It's not necessary given the or required given the results of the analysis. And I'm not sure what type of mitigation you had in mind. Did you talk about those sorts of things?
Yeah.
Pedestrian.
So as I was mentioning to the chairman, so I think you had talked about bump outs as being an option. We talked about some kind of a median, I think, on the northern end of the Sunbury Meadows to kind of mimic what's on the I'll say the southern end of that. So those are at least two of the ideas. I think there was I don't remember if parking on-street parking was an option as well to maybe kind of slow down traffic a little bit.
Yeah.
I mean, it came up during the Sunbury Commerce Park discussion.
That's
So,
right.
yeah, I mean, so those were some ideas, but, and I think we were even going to try to do some set aside of funding to make those improvements,
Right.
at some point as well. So there's been some discussion. I think we wanted to make sure we had the data first. It tells us that maybe it's not required, but it still doesn't mean that it wouldn't be valuable on some level.
Excuse me. There are a lot of options that you mentioned: chicanes, the bump outs, the medians, speed humps, which I don't recommend. One thing you want to think about is the operation and maintenance of that. I mean, I've been in a snowplow and hitting that speed hump you didn't know was there, and it's not a pleasant experience. It's also not good for your pavement. And actually, sometimes that's the same with, depending on the level of snowfall with medians or some of the other bump outs and stuff. You definitely need to be careful and have them well identified. But as far as a road diet goes, those things you mentioned, parking on both sides of the streets, anything that just takes you visually away. It's not necessarily a large physical thing, but it visually takes your mind away from it being a wide open racetrack that you go down. That's tended to be the way that it's worked. What I've had done in the past in different places is those bump outs, medians, identifying crosswalks better with piano key type crossings tends to get some attention. Those sorts of improvements. And if you wanted to, I know you've probably seen some of the stuff in City of Columbus where they integrate some green infrastructure into the roadway and sort of combine that with the road diet or complete streets approach, so that you might have a rain garden or some sort of green feature in the middle of the road as part of that median, or more likely off to the side if you've got the right of way easement or a resident's willing to give you some property to make that happen. It's just a little bit into their property, but then it bumps out into the street. The only thing there is it gives you an opportunity to start doing some green infrastructure and concert with your MS4 program and your stormwater needs. Wes is planning to write a memo for this. He just didn't have the chance to get it done, but he'll write a memo, summarize that, and present it.
All right.
So maybe I mentioned this to the chairman when he and I was talking about, I mean, maybe just a little bit about the number of vehicles that are going down there. I think, I don't have the numbers in front of me. 2,700, I think was the low end, 3,900 on the top end. I mean, that's a lot of vehicles going down that street. So again, maybe another reason to, even if it's not required, to maybe at least give some consideration to it. The other thing I'd say to the chairman, that while 85% of them are not going over that speed limit, I mean, you still got 200-ish vehicles in a given week that are going over that. And, you know, for a resident, all they've got to see is one or two go by, and that pretty much, you know, solidifies in their mind kind of what's happening. So, right. I did think it was interesting that it didn't matter on the low end whether the speed sign was showing. It seemed that 27 was the number, whether it was identified to the driver or not. It changed a little bit once you saw the sign on the top end. It brought it down a mile or two.
People want to see what kind of score they can get.
I've been told this.
There's a lot. There's like 4,000 vehicles. That's pretty significant. You make a very good point about 15% of that being a reasonable amount of traffic. Enforcement does make a difference. Not long term, but it'll make a difference. I do remember that happened in one of the communities I was in, and one of the council members' kids was one of the ones that was so that went over well. But it is good to really do some enforcement and actually write some tickets and get some attention from the passersby, particularly when they're not actual residents of the community.
Now, when we talked, you also said that there was a significant change, and I don't remember, I don't have my notes, between northbound and southbound. So they're coming into town one direction and leaving the other direction. I'm curious what that dog pathing looks like.
Curious what looks like?
What that pathing looks like. Like, so are they coming in on Route 3 and exiting out?
So if they're going north on Route 3, they're taking the right turn, right? No, actually, it's the opposite.
It's the opposite way.
Southbound.
Yep.
So
they're going to
coming
Granville.
south, and that could be like a shortcut to Galena, the communities at Galena.
Yeah.
Or across they just didn't want to have traffic lights up here by UDF. I don't know.
Yeah.
And it's like 1,000 more cars.
Yeah, that was the point I was making. It seems like more people would take the southbound, and I don't know how they're coming back, but well, they're coming back a different route. But there clearly is a traffic pattern issue going on there. Probably trying to avoid that light at 3 and Granville, but you still get it right at Meadows and Granville or in 3.
Yeah.
Or the timings on those lights. Yeah, that's what I would agree with. The timing was it's different. Yeah. It's true. Yeah.
I appreciate that Wes is going to formalize the report. I still think we need to look at some possible tailored solutions here that make sense. Services, maintenance, upkeep, but I mean, it still feels wide, and I don't think there's a whole significant amount of like tapering we need to do. It could just be one or two intersections, or some of the long stretch where there isn't an intersection, there's no homes. Taper it slightly. I like the idea of I'll call it the boulevard entrance. I think our master plan actually calls for that. Off of Granville and then going into communities at Sunbury. I think we need to do that for a couple of reasons, just like it'll calm traffic initially, but also, I mean, aesthetically, it's gonna look really nice.
Are you talking like a decorative?
Like
Wall type of thing.
so across from the pool in Sunbury Meadows, how there's like a tree lawn in the middle with like some architecture features.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Would you like that memo to include some potential, some options for accomplishing that?
And maybe just one or two. And the reason I say that is because we're gonna have funds available one time only for this. And we're gonna tip the Romanelli Apartments and tip the commercial building in front. And the developers know that. And we were anticipating that the majority of those funds would be utilized for Granville and Sunbury Meadows Drive. I just think, okay, if we use 10% or 25% of those revenues, I think it's going to generate something like $3 million off the top of my head over a 10-year period. We can knock out some pretty significant tapering, and let's just do it right while we can. And I normally don't try to like overrule what an engineer says. You're reading off like the 85th percentile, but I think to Daryl's point, I look at the 36 to 40, there's 199 cars over the same period. That's what, like 40 cars a day that are going 36 to 40 northbound.
And I mean, the reason that conclusion was made is that's an industry standard. It obviously is open to discretion by the community. And honestly, another thing that I've done in other communities with staff was I don't know that it is appropriate for this road, but just bear with me, is we had a smaller road in Worthington off of 161 that was experiencing a lot of speeding, and we didn't really know what the best approach was for a road diet type of approach. So we actually coned out a chicane. We just actually put the cones out, put some ropes amongst them. So it was that obstruction in their way, so that to see how it worked. And we did some testing, and it was good that we tested it, because we ended up using the same thing, but we moved it to another location because it had better response there. And that's something we can do on Sunbury Meadows. It might be a little bit too much traffic on that road to do that, but it's not out of question. Certainly, if we get in other roads and have these issues, we can do that.
Thank you.
Sir.
Any other questions on that topic before we move on? All right, so we've got permanent and summer staffing for the service department.
So we have 2 full-time positions that we're going to have to fill. There cannot identify existing job descriptions for them, so be working on job descriptions over the next few days. And probably we'd like to at least be able to hire 4 summer staff. We've got
Did you say 4?
4. Yes.
And these are typically high schoolers or college students.
Early college or right out of high school.
Okay.
We're going to have the crack ceiling trailer here. And so having one experienced employee work with 2 of them on that will keep them busy for quite a bit of the year. And then we use them on weekends for coverage on making sure flowers get watered, and they do have work for them during the summer, during the growing season, so to speak. So that is what's happening there. We had an internal discussion about the exempt, non-exempt issue. And then if we fill the second open position as kind of a foreman type of position. And I think I'm going to recommend that, just so we have backup and coverage, and hopefully someone else that feels their role is also to have a supervisory role in the department. So,
Did you land anywhere on the discussion of exempt versus non-exempt?
it really boils down to the issue of how much is the service superintendent going to be a working superintendent? I think we can make the arguments on the issue of having significant input on staffing, hiring and firing, because we have done that. It's just a matter of, is their primary duty to manage, and how much of that primary duty is to manage versus actually being a working supervisor. We're certainly going to want to transition that person into being more of a manager. So 75% manager, 25% working probably would meet if we were ever audited for Fair Labor Standards Act. But that's the piece of the definition that I'm struggling to make sure that before we call it an exempt position, that we know that we're going to not be able to rely upon that person to do a lot of work like snow plowing and things like that. So.
And 75-25 is the guideline at LSA.
There's no real set standard. It just says primary duties are managing, and it gives a long list of managing, which can be ordering and directing and things like that certainly match what part of that job is. It's just a matter of, historically it's been a very much a working supervisor. We relied upon that person to plow snow, to operate equipment. And so we just need to make sure going forward that we're comfortable with the majority of those duties being managerial type activities. So.
Makes sense. I guess my only concern would be that if it stayed non-exempt for the time being and you get a lifer in there, it's always hard to go from non-exempt to exempt rather than the other way around if you wanted to change the position down the road.
And you could probably, I'll have to explore if we could have some kind of a compensation related to, if you're the one of the 2 or 3 people called in on an overnight snowstorm, there's some compensation connected to that, but primarily you're exempt from overtime.
I think just do like work an extra day on the snow day or something, but you take an extra day off.
Could do that too. Yeah, just comp time, trade time.
I know at OSU, and I'm salaried, the only time I ever get comp time is if I get called in for a weather emergency.
Right.
So it could be something
like
similar.
traveling on a Saturday and a Sunday, you get like Thursday and Friday off next week or something. Superintendent seems to me like the title, and I think that's what you guys said, seems exempt to me.
I always feel like a department head, it makes sense to be exempt.
Me too.
But I see what you're saying too. If they're spending 50% of their time crack sealing, then you could have a real problem with, I'm sorry, water went down the wrong hole. But I think of a department head as being a salary position.
I do too. No, the other reason, I mean, just like the, whatever you want to call it, like the nature of people, they have X number of things to do no matter what. And if there's incentive to get things done faster and more efficiently. And I'm really using a prototype or like a stereotype more than I am like, the letter of the law, what the FLSA standards say. So, yeah, I mean, I like the idea of what you're talking about. I don't think I was involved in the conversation if you talked about this during the last services meeting where we talked about
this is
exempt
coming
versus
up
non-exempt.
before. No.
But I think that's a good approach.
Steve, do you have a time frame for when you'll be pushing the job openings for summer help?
For summer help, probably next week will be.
Your
doing
ideal
a lot
candidate
of
is
those
18
things.
or over.
Yeah, that's just, insurance wise, driving one of our vehicles, operating power equipment. Yeah, 18 makes sense.
Do you have
for
a
us.
starting pay in mind?
No. I think we paid pretty much close to the minimum wage, which I think is now bumped up to 10 something. So, an $11 an hour job.
Back to that superintendent role, the things that were coming to mind, like financial planning, people development, training, compliance, long range planning, and that's,
Mhm.
I think that's fallen on a bunch of different shoulders, right? Over the past. But the people leadership and the training compliance and regulatory things, I mean, those seem like the functions you really want an exempt person to own. If not, it falls on the administration, is what I'm trying to say. And that's, I think, where it's falling.
And the positions that I've looked at that I'm Frankensteining from, for lack of a better term, on the job description, that does track with what most communities are doing with their service superintendents.
Any other questions on that?
Is 4 what we had last year for the summer help?
I think we had 4 last year and one was pretty limited. They were an athlete, so they kind of getting out of college, they were a little bit late, and then going back to college, they were really early.
Okay.
So we really only had about 3 or 4 weeks effectively and I think there was even some camps or something that intervened on some of those. So we'd like to get 4 that can really work most of the summer if possible.
All right, thoroughfare and traffic control planning.
Thank you. Bob, Peterly and Wes have been doing some of these studies. It's in progress. And I've got some notes from Bob here. So Kintner and Cherry, the plan is to run a short-term trial before they go ahead and install any radio interconnect equipment. Bob is spending some time reviewing the timings with his staff and MP Dory to make sure they're optimized. Cherry and 3, I think there had been some issues there, some concerns after it was a slight change was made, and so he's double checking that. So I had an email. There was apparently an accident there the other night, which is concerning to all of us, and he's going to look at that and further refine his work and see what can be done there. Excuse me. And he's also working on a sketch for changes to parking signage and pavement markings on Heartland Meadows for your all circuit committee review. This would address issues during school loading in the morning and when events are occurring. And that's the extent of what I have. I'm happy to answer what questions I can and take others back to Bob.
Maybe I didn't hear you right. What's the details on the signs on Heartland Meadows?
There's pavement signage, parking signage and pavement markings to address the school loading and events. And I assumed you had talked about that to a point. So that was our topic 4 years ago.
4 years ago, we've been on the no parking signs.
Yep.
We talked about striping the road and that I think it was just probably that we didn't know exactly how it was going to work. We're going to try this first and see if it works.
Okay.
It kind of works, but if you've ever been over there in the morning, you can't figure out like where you're supposed to
Get
go.
on the bus.
Okay, well, if you drive up that section of road, there's a lot of confused people, and you would think
Okay.
there shouldn't be, based on the majority of them being the same parents that are dropping off their kids, but.
After the
there are-
first week, it should even.
And the Heartland Meadows, there's one other issue, and Wes, and I know Bob would know about it. The no parking sign, so if you're coming from Heartland Meadows, like from GRE and gonna go across to Kroger, there's a no parking sign on your right side. It's too far, it's too near the intersection. And so what you have is when you go to do the turn lane and the straight ahead lane, there's a car that's like blocking people to get into the right lane. I wish I had a visual I could pull up, but
I know what you're talking.
there's a no parking sign. It's the very far north on the east side of the street. It's too far forward, too close to the intersection. You can only stack like 2 cars.
It needs to be pushed out.
Yeah, it needs to be pushed back. And there's usually, for whatever reason, like 3 big trucks that park there.
Mhm.
I was gonna go out and just move the sign, but I'm sure there's something against that.
Very hands-on there.
Bob Keeley fixed the Heartland Meadows traffic light. Did I tell you that?
Uh-uh.
I saw him out there on a frigid Friday evening. And he's like not in a coat or anything. He's like, oh, really cold. He's in the box. And I mean, it was an immediate fix. But he just went in and did whatever he did.
Pretty good.
It's working great.
When was the trial at Cherry and Miller happening again?
I don't think he didn't give me a date. I'll find out though.
To be determined. Okay.
Yeah.
And then finally, stormwater utility.
Yes. We've kind of been in a holding pattern on the stormwater utility. Daryl and I have been spending some time looking through our MS4 program that stands for Municipal Separate Storm Sewer Systems for communities. It's a regulatory program, and we are a little bit behind in our reporting on that. We need to go in and both accomplish the reporting, but also look at some things that we may be out of compliance with, and we'll have to do some work. One of them being an ordinance for illicit discharge detection. Another is some testing of the outfalls from the storm systems in the community. They ask you to divide it into zones and do one every 4 years or so, and a few other things, but those are kind of ancillary at the moment. But the point is, we'd like to go, he and I both would like to go through and fully understand what's included in the MS4 program, see if there's any indicators there, red flags that'll help us out when we move into the stormwater feasibility study. But the next step there would be to have a charrette, a workshop with stakeholders to talk about how that stormwater utility would be received in the community based on what we would see it accomplishing for the community over the long term.
Will it change anything?
The MS4?
No, like just sorry, I'm being stupid. If it changes anything, nobody's gonna like it. But we have to change it.
Is that kind of change? Yeah.
Gotcha.
If it goes on Facebook, definitely don't like it. But it's the right thing to do. I mean, that's our
Well-
responsibility. We need to, this is a disaster waiting to happen if we don't do something.
Actually, that's an extremely good point about social media. I'm sure you've all experienced that. We might need to make sure we've got somebody that can go in and manage that well,
Right.
you know, PIO type of individual that's familiar with social media and can manage those comments. I know that can be stressful and raise red flags that don't need to be raised, that may not be accurate.
Right, but we did talk to the Delaware County Soil and Water District. I mean, we do think they would be an advocate for this. I mean, we think that they would be at this stakeholder meeting. They can also kind of help on the education side. That's one of the agreements we have with them anyway. So it wouldn't just be us trying to kind of explain and fend off comments, but it might be a group like that that's a little detached from the city that people might see as maybe a credible source.
And we're hiring media
I
consultants.
was just about to say, perfect job for that media consultant to sell the stormwater utility.
And Mayor, you make an extremely valid point. Workshop's not required, but there does need to be some communication with those stakeholders, business owners, especially the large commercial business.
Yeah,
owners.
large commercial and I'll say the government buildings,
Right.
the high school.
High school,
That's
schools,
the one
yeah.
that always comes
Yeah.
to mind.
So I mean, we can brainstorm other opportunities if you like, outside of this meeting. Maybe we pick a different approach.
Think about it.
Anything else on stormwater utility?
That's it, sir.
I'm trying to draw it out because we've got a little time.
I've got a couple of things.
Okay.
You hit on the thoroughfare and traffic control planning. I know I believe we were awarded an ODOT grant to connect all of our traffic signals through fiber, and I use the term dynamic traffic adjustments that can be made. Tony Chorowski, the district leader at District 6, reached out and said, it seems like our teams are starting to converse. Who are they conversing with from our side? Who is ODOT working with?
Oh. Yeah, it's Bob and Wes.
Okay.
Because I followed up just to make sure that was still moving, and they confirmed that that's kind of who they're interacting with at this point. So, and I'm trying to remember the name of the individual that Tony's it's Tony had kind of pushed us off to one other member of his staff. That person was the one I was communicating with. I've forgotten his name.
Was it Bob Davidson?
It might have been.
No.
But he was also going to be out of town, I think, in early March. So there's a little bit of kind of a slow start to that, but there's a start nonetheless.
Yeah, the way I had talked to Tony about it sounds like we're starting to make progress, as in actually working on some sort of design or something, like identifying right away where the fiber could run and utilize existing fiber. Tony made it sound like it was government fast, like a year. Like,
There you go.
so
I'll write
if
it down.
we get a note to Bob and Wes, they get like a point in time update from our perspective.
Okay.
I think it's-
I'll do that.
And then I had a question, I should really know this, but do we have a work order system that us or residents or staff or the police can submit something that generates a work order ticket, like a street light that's out or street sign that needs replaced or repaired, or potholes, things like that?
On our website, we do have a report of concern
Okay.
button,
Okay.
and they can fill out that and submit that, and it gets emailed automatically to the people that should be dealing with those issues.
And,
Yeah.
I mean, and more or less like just magic, it gets taken care of, or if it doesn't, there's a response or something that happens.
Yeah, and the system should be set up. I remember when I set it up in another community, it would age that work or that concern, and if it went too long, then it would send a second email to the person that's supposed to be working on it saying, it's been, X number of days, what's going on? There used to be a way that you could, I need to go in ours and see how it is. There was a way to bring it to conclusion and say, yeah, I fixed that street light, or I filled that pothole.
So they would create good reporting too. I mean, that's quantifying, hey, what are we doing?
Yeah, I mean, we might have that feature. We're not using that at the moment. We definitely need to start using if it's available. Because we've talked a little bit about maybe enhancing a work order system and also promoting it as well, right? I mean, we want the citizens to know that there's a way to do this. A lot of communities now have it as an app that you can do as opposed to accessing the website. So there's going to be room for improvement, I'm sure. But maybe, Amber, if you could just a little bit of research on what our system is currently doing. Again, it is working, as Steve said. I mean, it does communicate to city staff when a request comes in.
I thought I had seen something because the former supervisor of the services department one day showed me a printout of where a resident had a concern about the traffic light out by Kroger and GRE. And I was like, where'd that come from? I mean, it was really well written and like, hey, we're working on it or something to that effect. And then I had asked the chief, I said, how does your team report things to the services department that's out? I mean, they're out all the time, the street lights, and he's like, well, the third shift tells the first shift services. I'm like, oh gosh. Okay. Alrighty.
Plus those had a mobile site too, I believe, so they basically use their phone.
Thank you. Good point.
It's the same software, so I think we may just not be using it. There may be another layer we can activate on it.
Understanding the data around how much time people are spending doing different tasks and how many tasks they're accomplishing in a day will help resource plan for the future immensely.
I have one last thing. The streets program, how do I add in things that I see that we wouldn't have included in the broader streets program, like the speed bumps that not, you know what I mean? Not the real speed bumps, but like where the pavement.
The
comes
naturally
together.
occurring speed
Yeah.
bumps.
There's a couple of them,
Yeah.
that I know I drive over every day and I'm like, okay, I gotta make sure I get these on the list. So there's Stone. There's Millstone, Millstone Court. Or Millstone was one, and then what's the other one? Another Mill Street.
Yeah, it's all around the
Yeah.
mills.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You can send those to me and we are keeping a record of those for the street program. Including some other issues that are involved.
And the last question on the streets program, I thought I heard you say the other day, Dan, that we're going to bid sometime in May. Is that?
That's typically when I've done it. I've seen most communities do it. I don't know what our SOP is around here, but that would be appropriate because you'll get the contractors better pricing because it's earlier in the year. When they get toward the end of the year, they're busy and they end up marking it high.
Because I didn't know if that was early enough. If you're saying that
Oh.
early, then that's good. We need to have it done before August 15th or something like that.
Yeah.
So to beat the.
Just for schools, right?
Yes.
Uh,
And this is the one street I remember, it's Miller Drive, right? That we're talking about. I mean, it's by GRE and Kroger. I mean, that's a main
Yeah.
thoroughfare there.
do you know when you typically put it out on the street for bid?
I don't know. When you said May the other day, it gave me a little heartburn. I'm like, that seems late if we want to have it done by August 15th.
So my recollection was we accelerated it last year to get it done before the school year.
Right.
So, but that was a little sooner than we'd probably traditionally done. So I think what we're hearing you say is that really do want to try to consistently accelerate it, particularly if it's going to affect streets near schools.
Right.
But I thought the other issue is there's the
July 1st.
Yeah.
When the funding.
becomes
Right.
available.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So there's
They have to
tight
time that.
delivery window, and I'm focused on the actual work getting done window, less of the when we go out to bid. I just want to make sure we're not late on that and miss between July 1st and August 15th.
I can surely look into accelerating that. Valid point. I'll look at it.
Okay, thanks.
I just look at the timing of last.
Yeah,
year's bid.
we did meet it last year, so.
Okay. All right.
I don't know when, not off the top of my head, I can't recollect when it was bid out, but
Okay.
Sorry.
No, that's fine. You have a right to object. Do we have anything else for good of the order?
We have some electrical work done. I believe the events committee authorized the mayor to expend funds.
Yep.
And we're gonna do that. And do you want to give a little scope of what improvements are gonna be made?
I was going to do that in my committee report, but, just,
Sorry.
I don't really know all the details, but, I just wrote that staff received 2 quotes for an electricity upgrade, and the committee is recommending the lowest and best bid. It's within your spend limit and you've expressed your support. But from what I understand, we have a couple boxes out here, and apparently there's like portions of these boxes that work perfectly fine in theory, but the way the outlet or the plug is in there, it's inaccessible. The way it is placed in the box, we cannot use it. So we're not only going to like put some new spark plugs and just pick it up to where, whatever, I said I'm not an electrician.
Put a transistor in there.
Yeah, they're going to bring it up to code, and they're also going to change the layout of the plug so that they're usable.
Perfect.
Yeah, and
That is good.
Yeah, that's the meat of it for sure. I mean, they'll take out any of the receptacles that aren't working properly. I think they are going to kind of swap out some that are maybe, I may use the wrong term here. The amperage, they may kind of adjust so that it's, I think we've got too many high amp plugs at the moment, and probably try to downsize those a little bit. Again, just to make it a little bit more functional. But the real big issue there is you cannot get the 220 plugs in the system because of the orientation in which they're currently set. So that's the big change. So it's all three of the pedestals. So, and the pedestals are on these three corners here. There's not one over at the gazebo. So,
So food trucks should be able to come in, plug in. and
Correct.
go.
Yep.
And they can't do that right now.
Right.
I don't think we even offer them now, do we?
we don't.
No,
They have to be completely on their own generators.
Yeah.
So that'll be nice.
Yeah, because what they have to do, in order to get plugged into the box now, you basically have to take the plug off, expose the wires, connect the wires in directly into that box in order for it to work. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
It'll be a nice
We'll fix
upgrade.
it.
So, yeah.
I did one other thing.
Sorry.
Do you have anything? No.
So time for us.
The Parks Committee, I think, is working on some really exciting stuff, and we want to work on some exciting stuff too and help them. I saw Wes created a folder, I believe, out in the Parks Drive. It's a lot of historical documents. Like I'll call it streetscape plans that have already been created for the most part and just only maybe partially implemented. That's around the square that I've seen detailed drawings of that, and it gets me really excited. The other part that Wes and I have talked about is a broader plan to really make connectivity between the Ohio to Erie Trail, the square, the gardens, J.R. Smith Park. And that gets me even more excited because I was just talking to Cindy. I was like, hey, how do you get to the square? She's like, we just lean up against the wall and like shimmy down the street on 37.
I spoke in the visitors section at the parks meeting
Oh, you did,
and
good.
encouraged that and said that there's so many folks who live over there and we live within walking distance of the square and we can't walk safely.
Right.
And encourage that. And they talked quite a bit about connectivity and square and all that. And so I just was encouraging them and asked that they continue on that path.
Okay, how can we help? Because I mean, there's the parks visionary side of things, and then there's the road widening embankments, 37, restructuring like the future bridge for the Ohio to Erie Trail and shared ways and all this stuff. Streetscape plans, I mean, is parks, but there's a lot of services components in it. I mean, utilities and all that stuff, engineering stuff that we need to be considering as well. So I don't know where we are. I'm excited about it.
yeah. So I think what you're describing is the needs map that Wes had developed. So we'll make sure we share that with this group so you can at least see it. It does kind of outline not only street improvements, but also the park connections and kind of where the green spaces are and where the opportunities might be. So I'll give you that. The other thing is that Tim and I had agreed we'll try to schedule bi-weekly meetings for the Parks Committee to kind of hone in a little bit more on the scope of what's really the parks portion of that and what the other part might be. So maybe we engage somebody from the Services Committee to be a part of it. It'll be virtual, a part of those. And then maybe we can kind of, well, I know, we can do it later in the day.
Yeah.
We can do it.
I've done that.
And maybe kind of separate then what portion is really street or services related, parks related, and then kind of identify scope around the services side of that project. Yeah,
Makes sense.
I'll do that. Okay. And other thoughts?
Geared toward the 2-year, the state's capital budget to get that widening and that deck on that open spot.
Yeah.
Make that one big project. And have it shovel ready so that you can go to your legislative person and say, we need X amount of dollars. And by the way, here's a letter from ODOT that says they support the project because it deals with some larger issues related to traffic and intel and growth.
The Intel underpass.
Brand it.
I love it.
Put a big eye on it.
I'll drive now Intel ancillary path or somewhere.
Yes.
We'll get you that trailer, Cindy. Yeah. Okay.
One of the things that the parks the committee talked about was doing the J.R. Smith design charrette, but maybe at that same meeting, we want to have the downtown charrette and try to encourage the Chamber of Commerce to promote it. And maybe even if we just do a flyer around the perimeter of the downtown area to try to get the merchants to come in, the property owners, and, you know, have try to kill two birds at that meeting, get their support, hopefully. Because I think financially, if you can do a little bit of it as assessment, we'll try to find funding and you put a little bit of Sunbury money into it, I think it can be done.
Mhm.
And
Okay.
There's two places in Delaware County, the Ohio to Erie Trail won't be complete, Blackhawk and here. And after the bridge is complete. So, I mean, we do. It's exciting stuff.
Okay, I'll get that organized.
Anything else?
Sure.
All right, then I will make a motion to adjourn. Second by Ms. Cooper. Roll call.
Mr. Capel,
Yes.
Mrs. Cooper,
Yes.
Mayor St. John,
Yes.
Mr. Net.
You're adjourned. Thank you.